Now, so far we've seen a lot of similarities between tuples and lists, but unlike lists, tuples are immutable. Now that means that elements of a tuple cannot be changed once they've been assigned, whereas we can change elements of a list. So for example, let's take the tuple that we created in the last video. So if we access the first element of this tuple, we would put my_tuple, and inside square brackets we would put 0. Now if this was a list, we can then put the assignment operator and then choose what to assign this element in the list. However, with tuples, if we try to assign this a new value, for example the string hello, you can see we run into a type error, telling us that the tuple object does not support item assignment. This is what we mean by immutable. The elements cannot be changed. However, if the element inside the tuple itself is a mutable data type like a list, i.e. the nested item, then the nested item can be changed. So you can see here we have a list inside of this tuple. So if we access this list, we can put my_tuple, and in square brackets we would put index 5, seeing as it's the 6th element. This will bring back the list. If we now want to change the value 8 to be the value 80, we can then use nested indexing by placing another set of square brackets and then putting the index 2, as 8 is the 3rd element in the nested list. If we assign this to be the value of 80, when we take a look at my_tuple, we can see that the value 8 inside of the mutable list object has been changed to 80. Now let's think about this for a second. Why can we do this? Well, if we think about it, as soon as we access my_tuple and put in index 5 in square brackets, we have returned a list object. So we can now chain list methods to the end of this indexing because we're now working with a list object. So if I wanted to add an element to this mutable list, even though it resides inside of a tuple, we can do so. So if I was to put my_tuple square brackets 5 and then put dot append, we can add another item to this list. So let's add the value 100. When we now run my_tuple, you can see that 100 has been appended to the list object which resides inside the tuple. So note here that if we try to change an element inside of a tuple element, we will get a type error, as tuples are immutable objects. Whereas if the tuple itself contains an element which is of a mutable data type like a list, we're able to change the items in that element specifically. Now, if we wanted to change the values of a tuple, the way we can change them is by reassigning values. So here, if I type my tuple, you can see we have a long list which starts with 5 integers. Now, if I were to put my_tuple and then assign this a new tuple which contains 3 strings, so we'll put 1, 2, and 3. We have now changed the items stored inside my_tuple, but this is reassigning a completely new tuple to this variable. So we haven't changed the original object, we've actually assigned it a new tuple. Now a couple of other things we can do. If I type out my tuple, I have 3 elements within it. Now I can use the plus operator to add more elements to it. So if I put my_tuple and then put plus, I can then add 3 new items to our tuple by first providing brackets and then putting strings such as 4, 5, and 6. Now when we use the plus operator to combine 2 tuples, it's known as concatenation. So what we've actually done here is brought back a new tuple. This won't be stored anywhere unless we assign this to a new variable. So once again, we haven't changed the original tuple, we've simply concatenated another tuple, but then we would need to reassign this to a variable, so let's call it my_tuple_1, and now whenever we access this new variable, we have the 6 elements accordingly. Now another thing we can do is use the star syntax to bring back a new tuple. So for example, if I take the original my_tuple, which has 1, 2, and 3 stored inside of it as strings, if I multiply this by 2, we get the sequence of 1, 2, and 3 twice within our tuple. And if we wanted to, we could assign this to a new variable and then use it later in our code. So remember, tuples themselves are immutable objects. We're unable to change the elements once they've been assigned. However, if there is a nested element inside of the tuple which is of a mutable nature, such as a list, we're able to change the list's elements. For tuples, we can use concatenation to add values to our tuple, but we'd need to reassign or assign this to a variable. And the same with the multiplication, we're able to repeat elements in a tuple, but this brings back a new tuple, and we need to reassign or assign this to a variable in order to use it later in our code.